Eric Arthur Blair, one of the greatest writers of the 21st century, a man who said nothing, but convinced every nation on earth that what he had to say was important and vital. Eric Arthur Blair. 1984. A telescreen. A telescreen is the same as Communist China's massive surveillance program. China's surveillance program can survey data about your face, your clothes. It can tell what kind of jewelry you're wearing. But it's the same as a telescreen, which is a TV manually installed in every apartment in London. It's the same. An analog TV, a computerized surveillance computer that can process data at a rapid pace, and some greasy ink-socked security guard sitting in a room looking at all the telescreen data. It's the same. Wake up, people. George Orwell, visionary, genius, predicted surveillance before it happened. That is to say, he noticed that people were starting to be surveyed and wrote a book about it. And the book is important. If you don't read 1984, you're stupid. How dare you disrespect the legacy of Eric Arthur Blair? George Orwell. George Orwell was a lovely person. He was paranoid. He hated the communists and didn't want to pay his taxes because the Queen didn't have to pay her taxes. Why should Orwell have to pay his? Big Brother makes Winston pay his taxes, and Winston doesn't like that. Winston drinks Victory gin and Victory cigarettes. You know, 'cause it's 1984. 1984 is a great book. It's outdated, sure. Is it racist? Sure. Is it sexist? Yes. But it's important. Because Orwell took helicopters and TVs, two inventions that were around, and said, these things are evil. They have eyes in them, and they follow me around everywhere I go. Helicopters are bad news, people. We should stick to the horse and carriage. Orwell is unique because, unlike all the other science fiction authors, which look ahead, he looks backward. He doesn't want any of this futuristic stuff. It's too creepy. Taking risks, that's not for Orwell. It'll lead into a communist state where women are equal to men, and women wear pants, and women who wear pants intimidate Winston. Winston doesn't like women who wear pants. Pants are for men. Orwell is fascinated with the present and the past. He looks at a helicopter. He says, this thing is amazing. Meanwhile, Robert A. Heinlein in the 60s and Stranger of a Strange Land predicts a screensaver 30 years before such a thing exists. Do we recognize him? No. George Orwell, the visionary, predicted China's massive computerized surveillance because he predicted a future where everyone used analog TVs. There are no microprocessors in the world of 1984. No data collection, just a greasy ink-sock security guard sitting alone in a dark room, sorting through all the profiles of the residents of Victory Hall, most likely in a ledger. Orwell is very forward-thinking. 1984 is satire, so it doesn't need to be taken that seriously. But it's not satire because it really has a lot to say and it should be taken very seriously. Carry it around as your manifesto. Read it every single day. Read it, learn it, soak up all that knowledge from Daddy Orwell, one of the smartest men to ever live. 1984 is a masterpiece of science fiction. Other science fiction? Ray Bradbury, Isaac Asimov, Robert A. Heinlein, Damon Knight. Get out of town. Here comes George Orwell. George Orwell is great at thinking about how humans are bad and stupid and selfish and greedy, and they ruin themselves, and they're bad. Everything is bad. The government is evil. The government makes you pay your stupid taxes. Winston doesn't want to pay his taxes. That's socialism. Socialism is bad. The government is very good at making things up. It can say, freedom is slavery, war is peace, 2 + 2 is 5, good is evil, I'm a goat, leprechauns are lobsters. And people believe it because people are stupid and gullible, and people will believe anything. Newspeak. They're changing the very language. They're changing the language to make it more pleasant. So remember, if your local Guantanamo Bay refers to waterboarding as an enhanced interrogation technique, it's not, you shouldn't be at fault. You're not a moron. The government is just so powerful that they can convince you that waterboarding is just enhanced interrogation. It's not your problem that you can't pick that phrase apart and understand what it actually means. It's newspeak. It's designed to trick you because you're gullible and stupid. You'll believe anything the mean old bad evil government tells you. Like Orwell did. He was raised in a rich white family. He oppressed a lot of Asian people. But when we talk about the British Empire, we don't talk about Orwell because he was only following orders from his higher-ups. And so he's guilt-free. He repented later in life and said, maybe I shouldn't have oppressed all these Asian people. As everyone knows, the best authors are the ones with a lot of flaws, a lot of problems, a lot of past mistakes. I love authors whose lives are just one atrocity after another, who never learn and are just horrible people in general, because those are the most interesting authors. The ones with, like, serious mental problems, who think that black helicopters and CCTV cameras are following them around everywhere. And Orwell is a socialist, did you know that? He was not just a fascist calling himself a socialist and hating everything about socialism. He was a good guy. Sure, he hated on Gandhi and talked about how Gandhi was a dirty bum and about how Hitler's Mein Kampf is an excellent read, but he was a socialist, guys. We know this because he fought in the Spanish Civil War, the war that everyone cares about, the war that affected Spain, the war that affected the entire world. George Orwell wasn't in that one. He was in the Spanish one. George Orwell. He was a socialist and spent his life inaccurately portraying Stalin and talking about how Stalin is so bad. Lenin is evil. Only Karl Marx is the best communist, and all the other communists, they're not good. But Karl Marx has some problems too. Because he'd make you pay your taxes, Winston. You can't do that. Winston doesn't want to pay his taxes. George Orwell. What a smart guy. He got divorced and remarried a bunch of times. Women just couldn't handle his genius. Oh, George Orwell. You're such a genius. Using 1984 to talk about modern surveillance is kind of like using Robin Hood to talk about welfare. Sure, welfare is a problem, but there are better ways of redistributing wealth than shooting the Sheriff of Nottingham with your bow and arrow outside Sherwood Forest. 1984 will never be outdated. It will always apply because it was written in 1950 by an insane person. And as everyone knows, the best novels consist of anti-communist jargon scrawled on notebook paper mixed with a little of Eric Arthur Blair's gorgeous blood. He says that he would go down to the poorhouses and where all the hobos were, and he would say, "Hi, I'm a hobo too now. Please feed and clothe me." And the hobo would be like, "No, this is for actual hobos." And he would be like, "But I'm a journalist, and in order to report on poverty, I've got to pretend like I'm not an upper-class, spoiled white brat. Please let me be a hobo for a day." And they said yes. After this, George retired to his farm where he ate dirt soup and played around in the garden with his lovely grandchildren and his lovely pets, and he dug up mulch, he ate dirt soup, and it was a great time. The pastoral traditionalist, Eric Arthur Blair, you genius. You ate dirt soup and you died because you didn't believe in medicine, because you thought that doctors were evil, lawyers are evil, clergymen are evil. Everyone's evil. Everyone's out to get you, aren't they? Except the Queen. She doesn't have to pay her taxes, does she, Winston? If the communists got a hold of Great Britain, that would be awful. Most of the prime ministers of Great Britain have been on the Conservative Party because you don't like the communists, and if the communists took over, they'd erect giant stone pyramids with bizarre neologisms written on the side. I am a goat. 2 and 2 is 365. Good. I am good. We are good. We're killing people, but we are good. And all the people believe this, and they're like, Ingsoc, thank you. You absolute genius, Eric Arthur Blair. What more needs to be said about a man of such genius? You can revise history as much as you want. Go ahead. Talk about the failings of Abe Lincoln. Talk about how Kennedy was such a bad guy, a bad apple. Talk about how General Grant was such a bad guy. Talk about how George Washington was such a bad guy. But whoever you call out for their actions, don't call out George Orwell. He had many, many flaws, but we can excuse all that because he bestowed us with the gorgeous gift of literature. 1984. The story about the creepy sexist little wimp who tries to overthrow the bad evil government and doesn't because they torture him, and he's just like, okay, you win. totalitarianism exists. That's why 1984 is correct. Is the entire world divided up into three giant superstates where all the living conditions are horrible and nothing makes any sense, and you're not even sure who anyone is, or what anyone does, or what's going on? No, the world isn't like that. It's more like 95% well-run countries and 5% badly run countries, like North Korea. The citizens of North Korea are buying 1984 in droves because, of course, Big Brother is the same as Kim Jong-un. 1984 is universally beloved because you can use it to accuse anyone of being a totalitarian, even though it was written about communists. Eisenhower, your big brother. Kennedy, your big brother. Johnson, you too. Nixon, your big brother. Obama, your big brother. Carter, your big brother. Bush, you're both big brothers, even though you're father and son. Everyone is big brother. Liberals, conservatives, everybody loves George Orwell because nobody likes being watched. It's not fun, especially if the government uses manned helicopters instead of drones, with 2 people each per helicopter drifting around the windy city of Airstrip 1 looking for some pesky vagabonds. Could Orwell have envisioned a drone back in 1950? Probably not. Could a real science fiction writer have envisioned a drone? Yes, probably. That's what science fiction is about. Looking at the future, trying to understand the future. Is 1984 like the actual year of 1984 was? No, not at all. But it doesn't matter. 1984 isn't supposed to be real. It's not grounded in reality. It's a fantasy world. It's fiction. And by fiction, I mean absolute gibberish. It doesn't have to make sense. It doesn't have to say anything about the world we live in, even though I claim that it does say a lot about the world we live in. Drones and surveillance cameras, those would have been far beyond Orwell's grasp, and that's why Orwell is even more right, because he envisioned a world where everyone was surveilled by manned helicopters and analog television sets. And we don't live in that world. We live in a world where the microprocessor is king. But George Orwell didn't invent a microprocessor or even think about one. He didn't even think that computers would rule the future. But he's such a great sci-fi writer. No computers in his future. It's like 1940 or 1950, but the living conditions are worse. Nothing changes. The 80s aren't different from the 50s. It's all the same. Don't you see a continuous cycle of bad people, evil big governments, big evil governments infringing on the little guy? I've got to own my gun, but here Big Brother wants to take it away from me. I don't want to pay my taxes, but Big Brother forces me to pay my taxes. It's 1984. It's Orwellian. It's newspeak. It's the porno sec. It's double-think crime. It's crime double-think. George Orwell, you are the king of literature because you're wrong about everything, but you can convince so many people that you are some kind of visionary, a kind of rogue, you know. And nobody will ever talk about what you did wrong because you're so good at convincing everyone that you're a communist. Nobody would suspect anything else from you, you know. George Orwell, you cheeky genius. The big evil government is coming to ruin me. Poor George Orwell. He lived a hard life. Those childhood afternoons filled with treacle and croquet out in the backyard of his giant mansion. Must have been so hard on him to come from a broken home like that. His father was rich, his mother was rich. He's sent off to suppress Asian people, but that's okay. All the science fiction authors committed war crimes. Ray Bradbury? I guess he did. Who knows? George Orwell is a flawed guy, but his ideas are so good. What would have happened if he hadn't pointed out that sometimes people in power can misuse their power? Nobody had pointed that out before George Orwell. He invented the concept of a tyranny overnight in 1950 in his dirt cottage. George Orwell, you cheeky little genius. He's Big Daddy Orwell. He's the king of the industry because he will never die. We will always discuss him, regard him as a martyr, a complex figure, a genius, a mastermind, someone who made up words like newspeak and doublethink and pornosec, which are only used if they're to refer to the fictional make-believe world Orwell created in his delusional little head. Orwell, you slick genius. You are the best science fiction writer because all your work is depressing and lame and all the characters are flat. But none of that matters. I don't want to be told a good story because Winston is a little edgelord and you're a little edgelord and edginess is better than a plot. I love you, George Orwell. Eric Arthur Blair. You countercultural revolutionary who is countercultural because you took the cultures of others and warped them around to your own twisted perspective. The communists are coming to get me. I can't fight the fascists. I'll fight Franco. I won't fight in World War II because who knows? Eric Arthur Blair, you complex figure. You have so much nuance to you. You're not just an idiot. You're a nuanced individual. Who cares if your predictions about 1984 were wrong? That doesn't matter. It's 1984. It's make-believe. It's fiction. The goal of sci-fi isn't to discern what direction humanity is set, even though that's the stated purpose of your book. None of that matters. Sure, your book is indecipherable nonsense. Sure, all of it is garbage, but that doesn't matter because I like Winston. He's so likable. He doesn't like women in pants. He has a rape fantasy. One of his co-workers is an empowered communist woman, and he feels intimidated by that, so he wishes he could slit her throat and strip her nude. Keep making excuses for Orwell, people. That's what we need to do. Excuse this creepy little rapist. He's laughing from his grave at all of us. He's really bamboozled us, hasn't he? This creepy little rapist. Everyone loves him. Because Winston is sexually repressed, and that excuses his wanting to rape a female coworker because he's filled with testosterone. And so, who cares? George Orwell should be continued to be propped up as a genius, a literary icon. He's up there on the shelf with Hemingway. He's up there on the shelf with Kipling. He's up there with Dickey and all the other greats. Steinbeck, he's up there with Steinbeck and Salinger. Ben Shapiro wrote a novel called True Allegiance, The Nation's in Tatters. Big military man, Honest Joe MacGuffin to the rescue. People don't like that sort of propaganda. That propaganda is by Ben Shapiro, and Ben Shapiro writes propaganda. But George Orwell is a good old-fashioned author, the genius. He's an established person, and so nobody can ever talk about his work under a critical lens because his work is just that good. Don't think about it. If you don't like George Orwell, you're a totalitarian. If you don't like George Orwell, the anti-censorship author, something is wrong with you. George Orwell is a wonderful person. Do you not like 1984? Do you not want to read 1984? Read 1984. Slog through all 328 pages of it. You'll have to, or your opinion is invalid. Read 1984. It's a good book. It's about how the government is big and evil and watches people with their scary TV cameras and they're communist. And Winston doesn't like that. All Winston wants to do is light up a big old pack of Victory cigarettes and smoke them, because in 1984, nobody knows smoking causes lung cancer. Everyone flies around in black helicopters. 1984 is not a fetishization of totalitarianism. It's a staunch opposition where the protagonist is tortured and loses. George Orwell, you genius. No, but you are beyond criticism. Nobody can talk about how you're wrong or how you're stupid or how you're deeply flawed. Eric Arthur Blair, the greatest science fiction writer of all time, because I say he is, and everybody else says he is too. And we coin funny terms like two-minute hate, newspeak, pornosec, vagapants. We're so much smarter than you. Why don't you read 1984? George Orwell hates the hive mind. That's why from America to North Korea, from Britain to Sudan, everybody is reading 1984, or at least reading a synopsis, which sounds smart. They're not reading it. They're not looking at all the rape scenes, all the offensive stuff. They ignore that. All that matters is that George Orwell was kind of, sort of right about surveillance. And he doesn't need to make any sense. So long as an author can have a tremendous impact after his death and his estate can make a shit ton of money. That's all that matters. Eric Arthur Blair, you unrecognized genius. You're so smart. I love you. I love you. Eric, why don't more people read